Good morning, everyone. Let's give it a couple of seconds while everyone comes in. Good morning, good morning. Good morning to you, Lori. How are you?
Hello there, Lauren. And I see the numbers are climbing aggressively, which everybody knows makes me happy. Welcome back, frequent flyers. Welcome to anybody new to the show. So glad to have you on Small Biz Talk.
Oh, look at them. They're still growing. So let me give it a couple of seconds so everyone can come in. I'll go ahead and share my screen though, Lori. I know we got a ton going on today.
We do. Okay, Lauren, I can see your screen.
Perfect. Excuse me. It looks like we're studying, so I'll get started now. Good morning to everyone again. Nice to see you. My name is Lauren Simpson. I am with the SBDC, or the Small Business Development Center. We are a national program with over 1,000 locations across the country, and we offer no-cost services to local small businesses. Now, our services are at no cost to you, the small business owner, because your tax dollars have already taken care of our fees. Oh, let's get this technology to work. How about that?
Sometimes that's technology.
There we go. So for the Los Angeles network, we represent or we serve the Los Angeles, Santa Barbara, and Ventura counties. And so if you are in any of those counties, please be sure to get in contact with one of our local centers. You can see them represented on the map in front of you. We're over in Camarillo, Santa Clarita, over to Pasadena, even Laverne, all throughout Los Angeles, the South Bay, down to Long Beach. So again, you'll want to get in contact with us because we offer no-cost business advising and virtual training. So let me dive into the business advising. So that's your chance to be able to meet one-on-one via Zoom for now with one of our business experts. And we have experts in the fields of marketing, technology, business planning. If you need assistance going from being a handyman to going into construction, if you're at the very beginning and still ideating a business, or if you're looking to grow, we can definitely assist you. Now, I mentioned experts, but we even have a guru, Miss Lori Williams, of all numbers. So be sure to get in contact with one of our advisors. And then we also, like I mentioned, have virtual trainings, and they're comprehensive workshops that, again, assist you in either adapting or growing. And so those trainings are very similar to the show you've joined today. So please be sure to get in contact with us today. You can see right there on the screen, it says we're here to help, and we are. We'd love to assist you. You can reach us by phone, 866-588-7232, or you can go online, which is smallbizla.org/new client. Now, if you've reached us and you're outside of our service network, which is the Los Angeles, Santa Barbara, and Ventura counties, please be sure to go to americassbdc.org/find your SBDC. So Lori, we've been having some conversations related to funding. I know we're going to dive into that even more, but I wanted to quickly share a new grant opportunity we have going on right now.
Perfect. Yep. We've been talking about that for a while, guys. I just want to keep bringing it up every single show. Lauren's going to show you the website. We're not going to go into as much detail as we did the last couple shows. So if you want to get more of a run through the website, you can just tune into last show or the show before. Go ahead, Lauren, give them the highlights.
Sure. So I will put the URL like Lori mentioned. I'll put that into the chat. This is the EOG, or the Economic Opportunity Grant Program. This is the landing page. So as soon as you click that link, you'll be brought here. This is what I really wanted to share, Lori. If you go over to the Get Help tab, I'm going to go ahead and click it. Here we are, and scroll. These are going to be very important. So there are info sessions. We have webinars that are weekly at noon in Spanish and English, as well as in the evening. And those are like drop-ins. So if you have a quick question, about 5 o'clock is when it starts. You just ask your question and you can either stay the duration of the session or you can leave. We have live support. So there's a phone number I'll be sharing. There are video tutorials here, and then application guides. So again, like Lori mentioned, you can view past shows to see more about this program. Again, the EOG, or the Economic Opportunity Grant Program. And I'll be sure to share a link in the chat. And before I give it over to you, Laura, I just wanted to do quick housekeeping. Everyone, please be sure to put all questions into the Q&A. Again, let's put questions into the Q&A. Lori can kind of take a look at those as she's presenting. And then the chat will be reserved for any tidbits of information and links that Lori would like to share with you. Thank you, Lori.
Perfect, perfect. Okay, I've got a few things for you guys today. Once again, I always like to announce the new dates for the financial literacy series. You know, I got to say this series is really going well. I think I already have almost 86 to a little bit more signed up for session 1. When Lauren puts the links in the chat, you'll be able to select each of the link to get a complete description on each of the sessions. But session 1 is general, kind of what do you need to know about accounting, different ways that you can gather your information. Session 2 and session 3 gets very deep into what I call managerial accounting, knowing what financial information, the minimum you must know to successfully operate your company. Session 2 begins with an Excel document talking about how to calculate your profitability and really keep an eye on that. And session 3 is a deeper dive. Then I also have coming up my legal structure company, where I talk about the combination of which legal structure and what tax advantages are per each legal structure. It is kind of a 360 overview because I've talked to so many people who have incorporated believing something to be true and it not. So I started doing this webinar to kind of go over some of the basics, and it's also been a big hit. So we were brought back. That one's from the Pasadena SBDC. Also, I want to talk about upcoming shows. Next week, we have Holly Eve on, who owns Madam Lemmy, which is a natural deodorant company. Now, back, I don't know, Lauren, that might have been the 4th, 5th show. It was early on when we were just starting out over a year ago. Holly came on and started talking about what it took to start up her company, etc. Well, I just talked with Holly and said, hey, Holly, would you like to come back on, give us an update, and what would you like to talk about? And she said, finally reached profitability. That's what she wants to talk about. And I've been working with Holly for a very long time, as well as many of the advisors through the Pasadena SBDC. And she's had a lot of experiences to share on what she had to do and the choices she had to make to get to the level of profitability. So come join us next week to talk about that. And speaking of the Pasadena SBDC, Alex Vasquez is going to come on the following week. I wanted to have another person talking about marketing and social media to grow sales. Important topic, especially with the new year. Lots of people are looking at how can I grow my company? So we're going to have somebody else come on and talk about it. Speaking about shows, if you in the audience, anybody wants to be a guest on this show, or you know somebody I'm booking for the year, please send Lauren an email. Just say, hey, I know somebody that would be good on the show. Always wanting somebody to come on to share your experiences. And those of you who are a frequent flyer and join the show a lot, you know, it's not about, oh, I've achieved this and I've all these great things. It's what am I experiencing? What am I going through? And even if you have a story to tell that didn't necessarily turn out that great, it's sharing the information so others can learn from it too. Inspiration, anything that you got to share, we would love to have you on. So before I go to today's show, I wanted to bring up something rather quickly, and that is tips for finding a tax preparer. I am getting a lot of clients that are now struggling at the last minute to find somebody to do the tax returns. And many people are having to interview tax preparers. So I just wanted to give you just a little bit of information on how you can successfully interview a tax preparer. One thing to consider when you have somebody do your tax returns and you are a company, even a sole prop, any legal structure, company, versus just your personal tax returns, it's a different level of experience and understanding. So it really behooves you to have a tax preparer that does business tax returns. Now, often you'll get tax preparers, CPAs or EAs, enrolled agents like myself, who are doing personal tax returns and just happen to do a few business tax returns because their personal client tax returns, they have a business, usually just a sole prop, and they're doing a Schedule C. you might want to focus and find a tax preparer that is predominantly doing business tax returns and then happens to do personal tax returns because of the business owner. It's kind of like twisting it on the other side. So here's kind of a little sneaky way to ask questions to them so you can get a straight answer. You could first say, do you do business tax returns? Now they may say yes, but they only do 1 or 2 Schedule C's for a sole prop, but that's really not vast experience. So then you can come back and say, what portion of your client base has a business? That's giving you another more layer of detail. And then you can ask what legal structures are common for clients in your business, sole props, LLC, S Corp, let them answer. But what we're trying to learn is what type of businesses do they work for? And if you hear S Corp, you know they've got another layer of experience in case you plan on getting to that legal structure or are that legal structure now. And then people ask me, where do you get a good referral? And everybody says a friend, etc., but that may not be the right fit for you. So although that's a wonderful place to start, I say always interview at least 3. 1 isn't good enough, 2's a dilemma, 3 is a choice. I've always said that about everything in life. 3 is a choice. And interview them with a seriousness, because finding a good tax preparer is crucial as a component of your company. So engage in the interview, take the time to interview. And the last words on this, for some reason, when people get around tax preparers, they tend to not be in control of asking questions, almost as if they are knowledgeable and they can't ask the tax preparer questions. I want you to come from a standpoint of, I am going to interview, I'm going to ask questions, I'm going to learn about your services, instead of just, do you do taxes? Okay, can you do mine? Open up some space in between that decision. And then also ask them, if I was to work with you, what information do I have to provide? What format does that information need to be in? When does that information need to be given to you? What can I expect in return? Ask these crucial questions up front, because ideally, you will find a tax preparer that you'll be able to work with for years to come. So invest the time up front to ask the right questions, because not everybody out there is a good tax preparer. I have to say it that way. So with that, as Lauren mentioned, talking about funding, one thing I know is front of mind, many entrepreneurs, their question is, how do I attain funding? We all know that. I'm sure everybody in the audience is shaking your head. Yep, I want to know that too. Now, in the past shows, we've had a couple with Nate Jemison and Keith Rogers on to discuss financing options for small businesses. And in fact, I've asked Lauren to put in the chat the links to those past shows. So anybody who missed the show and wants to watch it, you can take a look at it. Because we talked on those shows about traditional bank loans. We talked about SBA funding. We talked a little bit about microfunding as well. Now, Keith and Nate both are on what is called the ACT team at the SBDC, and that stands for Access to Capital Team. What they do is they help companies at no charge through the SBDC. They help companies not only get the documents and the papers together in order, but then make introductions to different lending institutions that may be a good fit for the company. So if anybody wants to get an appointment with someone on the ACT team, Lauren's email's in there. Just email her and let her know that you're needing help and want an introduction or help with paperwork. I'm on the ACT team as well. I help in the accounting and the financial forecasting and everything to get the documents ready. Now, with that said, what I have felt is though we talked about these, but we just kind of left off the conversation with discussing ever so slightly the micro funding. And I know that many in our audience either just need a small amount of money or cannot qualify for a bank loan or a traditional SBA loan, whatever. And so I felt as though I wanted to have a show where I really started with the microfunding and we focused solely on microfunding. So with that said, I was very excited that Sebastian De Vivo would come on our show. He is an advisor at our very own Pasadena SBDC. Shout out to Annie. And the SBDC at Pasadena is a great supporter of the show. I always want to say thank you. And Sebastian, thank you for coming to our show today. Welcome, welcome.
Absolutely. Nice to be here.
Well, Sebastian, whenever I ask somebody to be on the show, I, get the links, I plug into different things. I try to find out, who they are. So I went into your bio and I got to say, I was a little bit surprised. I wasn't expecting. So you got to share with the audience, give us your background and tell us a little bit about your background, your studies, and what brought you to here.
Yeah, sure. So let me just start by saying that my dad has been a financial advisor for his whole life, and his specialty has always been access to capital for small businesses. So obviously when I was 16, 17, 18, choosing where I was going to go and what I was going to do, my goal was to be the exact opposite of my father. So I chose initially to study art history and then archaeology. And then, really enjoyed it because it's really fun, and ended up taking it all the way. So I did get a PhD in archaeology. My focus was on ancient history. So I got to spend a lot of time in Greece and Italy and France and Germany. It was really fun. But, once I got my PhD, I was doing my postdoctoral fellowship. I was teaching seminars, and, I was just realized that I was sitting there talking to, 10 or 15 incredibly privileged kids, very smart. But I was walking out of the classroom just not feeling like this was me, like this is what I really wanted out of life. So, ended up leaving my postdoc and moving back to LA, and got a job at a nonprofit where it happened to be that my role was access to capital for small businesses. So ended up turning into my dad. But at that point, realized how fulfilling and how important that job was. So I just basically took it and ran with it.
Oh my God, that is great. I've been watching these ancient civilization where they go on these archaeological digs, and I find it so fascinating. So I guys, you could see why I had to bring that up. And the other thing I have to say, Sebastian, I find that in my life, so many times we start here and we try to get away from there. We go everything and we end up right back. That happens so often. So now it makes sense, because I didn't know your dad was in finance. I was like, okay, he's got to tell me the connections. I got to figure out what the connection is. So why don't we just start out with a general question? What, everybody in the biz on the show, and they're tuned in and they're thinking, I need money. But before we say I need money, there's things that company owners should consider and think about beyond, I need the money, put it in my hand, right? So, and everybody first says that I need my money, but there's other words we should give as advice. So I'm just going to open the forum to you. What should company owners be aware of and consider when they need financing?
Okay. So there's two very important things that you need to keep in mind. The first one is commercial loans or commercial debt are very different from personal loans. For a personal loan, you go get a credit card, you buy something, and then you're stuck paying it off, expecting that you will enjoy whatever you bought, and that's what makes it worth it, right?
Right.
Commercial loans are completely different. You do not borrow money unless it's going to generate revenue directly. So whenever you think I need money, it always has to be followed by, in order to get this, in order to make this. Yeah. If you can't draw that line, you need to stay away from debt, because all you're doing is creating a problem for yourself down the line.
I love that, by the way. Lauren, can you put that in the chat? Because what you just said, Sebastian, I've not heard it said so eloquently. I don't know if, I think I've been a banker as well in my background, right? So we always go usage of funds, but I love the way that you just communicated. So Lauren, if you could capture any of that, or if you can give one sentence, I want people to see that in the chat, Sebastian. If you were to put that in one sentence, if you want to borrow money, finish that sentence so Lauren can put that in there.
Then what do you need the money for, and how is it going to generate revenue for you?
Perfect.
If you can't convince me that those three match, then you need to take another think.
By the way, we just got a comment from Albert in the chat. Spot on. So already we're gaining information. Keep going, Sebastian. You said two things. What's the others?
Okay, now the other thing too is the second thing you need to consider is that financial institutions are private institutions who are under no obligation to give you money or to lend you money. So, we cannot think that they were put on this earth to fund our businesses. Now, what we do need to think about is what's a win for them? What are they looking for? How are they looking at me? So what is the framework by which you are being seen by this bank? And, when we're talking about lending money, the most important thing that the bank is going to think about is how are you going to pay me back? Right? A lot of times we don't consider that. We think I have a great idea, or I'm really smart, or I have all this experience, but, making the connection between that and the ability to make a loan payment has to be super important, because otherwise you're going to go to a bank and, you can go to anyone and ask for money. And the first thing they're going to ask you is, how are you going to pay me back? So that's the other thing you want to think really carefully about, because to me, like every time that I work with an entrepreneur, our pitch is always crafted to answer that question. Now, there's many different ways that you can answer it. The basic one, and I think this is what you covered on your SBA loans talk, is, when you go to a bank and you say, let me borrow some money, the way the bank decides is by saying, could you have paid me back for the last 2 years? That's why tax returns are so important. So, you show up, you say, give me money. They say, can you pay me back? You show your tax returns, and there has to be a net profit in those tax returns that shows that you can comfortably cover whatever you're asking to borrow from the bank. So if your payments are going to be $5,000 a month, then, on a conventional or an SBA loan, you need to show 2 years of tax returns that show, 75 to 80,000 in net profit, which proves to the bank that you could have paid them back, which means that, okay, we can talk now about lending you money.
I love that. Now, let me ask you this, Sebastian, and go with it in any direction. So say that my tax returns don't show that I could have paid back. And me, the entrepreneur that's really excited and not having any bank knowledge, is saying, but I got this new sales that are going to happen. So I can in the future, even though the past doesn't show. Can you walk me through how that looks to a bank?
Yes. So basically, the way we approach it is, our best case scenario, you have great credit and you can show repayment ability, those 2 years.
Okay.
Our next best case scenario is that you can show repayment ability for 1 year. So if you're asking now, and this is anybody thinking about doing tax returns right now, think about this, because if you were to ask for money in 2023 and you can show that in 2022 you could have paid that loan, there's a conversation to be had. And that's usually when the SBA guarantee is really, really important, because what the SBA guarantee is, it's essentially the SBA comes in and says, if this person defaults, I'm going to give you back 80% of what they owe you. So for the bank, it reduces the risk, quite a bit. So it makes them rethink okay, well, you couldn't have paid me back for 2 years, but you could have last year. And now the SBA is stepping up and vouching for you. We can talk. Now, the third best case scenario is credit unions and organizations called Community Development Finance Institutions, CDFIs.
Okay.
So for banks don't make money on loans under $1 million, so they don't want to do them. It's always an uphill battle. But there is legislation that created these organizations, these CDFIs, so that Bank of America will give them money to loan it to these loan amounts that aren't profitable but still need to be done. So the organization is essentially doing it on behalf of the big banks, and their role is essentially to look at you as a person, right? So they're actually the first ones that look up from the numbers and look at you. And that's when microfinance, and that's when a lot of the more problematic questions can be answered, because now you have a form. So that's when you could say, well, yeah, I don't have the numbers, but I have a contract with Walmart and they're going to order 5,000 units a month for me. Or I ran a business for 20 years and had to take a break for 5 years, but I know what I'm doing. So you can take a chance on me and you can lend me money to start a business because what that I'm good at. that's when projections are really important, you know,
Gotcha.
so that's when there's really an opening for you to make a case and get some money where you wouldn't have in the other two cases.
Now, I love where we're going with the conversation, and I want to kind of repeat something you said so the audience caught that. So when we went down to this next level, and we talked about CDFIs, and we'll come back to that in a second, one of the things that you said that I just loved is that that is when the bank looks up and looks at you as a person. And as you started speaking about management experience or what's going to be happening in the future. So this is a whole nother level of understanding that they're trying to gain about the future forecast of the business. So I just wanted to come back because I love the way you said that so eloquently. But with that, with the CDFIs, I like this portion of our conversation. And it's one, Sebastian, our audience has not been exposed to at all. We've not had this conversation. So is a CDFI like a quasi-government? Is it also government? You mentioned the relationship with the bank. Can you walk us some more layers into this? Because I know our audience has not had this discussion with us at all.
Right. And that's really, when we talk about micro lending, that's really what's key here, because, you know, they are going to look at you as a company, but they're not going to give you $1 million. They're not going to give you 500,000, you know, they may give you 50, they may give you 25, they may give you 100. Those are acceptable risks for them, given that they're going to look at you holistically, but that is the essence of microfunding. So the way this works is, you know, like I said, a bank doesn't make money on loans under $1 million. So, you know, there was a need and it had to be filled. And luckily we were able to legislate so that, you know, private regular banks could fund these loans. Now, CDFIs tend to be nonprofit organizations. Okay. They need a lender's license, obviously, but, you know, they're not like a bank. They're not like a credit union. They're just a lending institution focused on these particular loans, which means that the way they look at them and the controls that they have set up for them are based on that. So, you know, the really important things when you go to a CDFI, when you ask for a lower loan amount is, you know, obviously, what are you going to use the money for? But, you know, why you? What is it about you and your experience and your expertise that makes you able to take these 50,000 and turn them into 100 or 200 or start a business or grow a business using that money? What is it about your idea? What is it about your connections or your network or your vendors or your suppliers? And the going back to that, you know, how are you going to pay them back? Are there people that, you know, maybe a husband or a wife that has a job, that has income, that can, you know, be part of that package? So, you know, in that sense, if you go to a CDFI and you say, hey, you know, I can pay the $1,000 a month toward my loan from the sales that I'm going to make, but my husband or my wife, you know, makes $4,000 net every month, then, you know, the bank is going to say, okay, well, you know, maybe it works out, maybe it doesn't, but if it doesn't, I'm still going to get paid back. So that makes it a more acceptable risk for me.
Got it. Now I've got two, and I'm going to ask the questions at the same time so I don't forget one. One of them is just a quick, more factual statement. So with the type, we know that there's a lesser loan amount. We talked about that. Is there anything such as inventory or working capital or not inventory or working capital? So is there any usage specific? And then the longer question is, from what you're telling me, Sebastian, I'm starting to pick up that the pitch is really matters. So just first of all, a factual on the types of loan and what the use of funds can be in this type of scenario. And then I think we need to talk about a pitch because it's sounding like that's an important aspect.
Right. So that goes back to the use of funds goes back to, is it going to generate revenue for you? Okay. So for some, it's easy. You know, I'm a wholesaler. I'm going to buy a container of stuff. I'm going to sell it and I'll make money. You know, if you're a manufacturer, I'm going to buy a machine that's going to allow me to make, you know, 1,000 units of this or that. I'm going to sell them and I'm going to make money. So that connection between the money you're getting and deploying and the revenue it generates is pretty easy. Some are harder. So, human capital can be really tricky because, we can say, hey, you give me 50K, I'm going to hire a marketing director, and that marketing director is going to double my revenue, right?
Yeah,
Maybe not. So, so there's room there. You have to go to bat for this marketing director and show this kick-ass resume and make sure that, you convince everyone that it's there, but it's a much harder ask. So it really depends. Can you draw a line between the money that you're getting and the revenue that generates? If you can, then we're in business.
I like that. I think that's a great visual for our audience to have in their mind's eye, that line between the money you're asking for and the revenue that you're going to make to be able to repay the loan. It's really a circular I made it into, but that's really the visual that should be front of mind for everybody. Now let's talk paperwork. We know from listening to both Nate and Keith, especially when we were talking about the SBA, we had a whole long list of paperwork that they had, and also an extended time frame that it would take because of this paperwork. So let's talk about paperwork, which automatically kind of brings timeframes in as well.
Right. So, I mean, it's important, I think, to distinguish between startups and existing.
Oh, yeah.
Microloans work for both, but if you're an existing business, it usually is treated as a loan, and it's going to require a lot of paperwork. I mean, look, you have to show them your tax returns because that's your business. That's the revenue that it generates. That's the net profit. That's the only certified document that tells them your numbers, the tax returns. Your personal tax returns, because you have to stand as a guarantor. So, what you can provide or not, that's important. The debt schedule, if you have debts, the personal financial statement, those are all standard for any loan. If you're a startup, obviously you don't have a financial history for a business, so then it's your financials, your personal tax returns, your personal financial statement, but then the burden of proof is going to be on your projections. And here's the thing about projections, because they're numbers, we think that they're straightforward, and they're not. Numbers are a strategy, and numbers tell stories. So your projections is your opportunity to tell your story. So how I say, draw that line between the money you're borrowing and the revenue it's generating. You paint that into your projections when you say, okay, I'm going to receive $10,000 from the bank. And so, I'm going to have a line item that says cost of goods, 10,000, because I'm going to buy a container of stuff. And then following month, I'm going to see 2,000 in revenue, 2,500, 3,000. And then, that's the picture that you're drawing. 10,000 go toward inventory, and that inventory becomes revenue, and it slowly increases month after month as you become, more entrenched, as you market. So, that's the story that we're telling. We add elements to it. So it's like, okay, in 6 months, I'm going to turn my 10K into 100. And now, I can sell 100K myself, but for my next 10K container, I'm going to need help. So now you tell that story. A line item, an expense line item for an employee comes in that's going to help you sell. And then that employee becomes higher sales. So all these, you're showing the relationship between your revenue, your expenses, your investments, your revenue as you go along. And that's the story that's the story that you have to sell to the bank to make them want to take a bet on you.
Now, Sebastian, you said a word that I use quite a lot when I talk about forecasting. So I want to take a moment just to speak to the audience on forecast. And that is the word relationship. Back some years ago, I actually was a advisor to an investment bank. And what they would ask me to do is look at the financials and tell them if I believe the management knew what they were doing. I would basically say whether it was BS or not. And one of the ways I knew is when I saw these incorrect relationships where like the revenue went up, but the expenses didn't go up accordingly. And you're like, oh, this drives me up a wall. I can look at it immediately. One time I was looking at some numbers in the management was like, what problem do you have with this? And they were selling hours, but they didn't add any more consultants, and they sold hours beyond 24 hours in a day. And I was like, are you God? Did you just add more than 24? I'll take some more hours. So people don't look at the fact that the story has to be seen. And I always say, walk away from the financials, turn and open up the shop door, if you will, and see what picture you're painting in reality with the numbers. So it's real important to the relationship. And this is where I can say a plug for the Pasadena SBDC, for you, for our ACT team. This is where they're looking at the numbers, because once any finance lender sees numbers that don't make sense, it's very hard to walk back into the relationship. They're already, you scare me, I don't like you, no, and it's hard to go back. So I wanted to take a moment, and there was one other thing that you said that I wanted to take a moment and go back before we get into some details, and that's two words I'm going to combine. And that is planning and tax returns. So everything I'm hearing you say, and we're not saying the words directly, but I want to kind of bring them to the table. It's better to plan in advance for a funding need than respond in reaction.
You have to. So I mean, the first time you get funded, you get what you want, you get what you can, and you make as much of it as you can and you move on. But from that point on, you're always a year ahead. So I need to know what my capital needs are going to be in 24 so that my 23s can say what I need them to say.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't know that, then essentially whatever you ended up saying on 23, you're going to be at its mercy in 24.
Yeah.
Because you didn't plan. So that's why you always need to know, okay, I am going to need 50,000. I'm going to need 100,000 next year so that I can show this year that I could have paid it back. So
and
that's
this is where you want also to have a conversation with your tax preparer, so you're not
yes.
making tax choices that are going to show no profitability, which is a double-edged sword. I mean, because you don't want the profitability because you don't want to pay taxes, but you do that in the wrong years, you're not going to get the lending. So I think also, and I'm going to ask you to speak to this to reiterate it too, companies don't realize the importance of the tax documents. They see tax documents as something you do for the IRS and the state, and you file in a drawer. And that's not true. They are the resume of your company, and they don't realize that. Can you speak to that too, Sebastian, to drive that point home?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, at the end of the day, like, you're going to the bank and you're saying, these are my numbers. The only document that has standing as far as the bank or the institution is concerned is your tax returns. That's the only thing that they can look at and say, okay, this is how much you made, this is how much you spent, this is how much you netted. You can show them P&Ls until, profit and loss, until the cows come home, but those change,
Yep. Yep.
So until it gets codified into that tax return, nobody, people are gonna, okay, sure, but they're not gonna expect you to stand by those numbers, and they're certainly not going to stand by them themselves. Exactly. So the tax document is the resume. It's the one place where they will believe you.
Yep, it is. That's so true.
Makes it so critical.
And that's not the year that you want to file an extension. If you're going to try to find financing, you want to get your tax documents without filing the extension, because the worst thing is to say, I haven't filed them yet, and waiting till October, because they don't have any history until the year previous, and they're not going to like that as well.
Right. I can tell you that whenever I'm doing a loan, like I have several in process right now, most of them are allowing us to do a profit and loss as a placeholder. But before they fund, they will ask for filed tax returns. Yep. So there's just no way around it.
Okay, did you hear that, guys in the audience? Before they fund, they're going to ask for filed tax returns. Not, I'm in the process, filed.
Right. And that's the other really important thing. And hopefully, if there's like one takeaway, let it be this one. a tax preparer, they're going to make you happy if you don't have to pay taxes. So that's what they're trying to do. So you go to a tax preparer and they're going to be asking for as many deductions as possible so that they can put you at a net zero and you don't pay taxes. You'll be happy and they'll be happy. But again, if you go to a bank and you say, let me borrow some money, and then you show your tax returns and it says zero net profit, they're going to ask you, how are you going to pay me back? And you can say, oh, well, that's just what the tax preparer did. That's not really true. They're going to be like, okay, whatever, that's just not how the real world works. So having said that, you have to be very strategic about the numbers that you want to show on your tax return, because you're working against a tax preparer who wants to get you to net zero. So that being the case, if hey, next year I'm going to need to borrow money, you need to bring that up to your tax preparer and you need to say, look, I'm going to have to borrow $50,000. That's going to be a $1,500 a month payment. I need to show this much in net profit. So in a best case scenario, the tax preparer will get you right there. So your net profit is exactly what you need to show, which means that you're only paying the taxes that you need to pay. But, obviously there's a cushion. Sometimes it's a little higher, sometimes it's a little lower. But know that this is up to you. Tax preparer, their job is not to help you get money. Their job is to help you not pay taxes.
Those are very great points. And I'm going to get into in a minute some microfunding companies, maybe some specifics. But before I do, I can't leave this topic we're having right now, Sebastian, without discussing loans from shareholders. I figured you might know this is a tax treatment that is used commonly by tax preparers to get the tax amount that is owed down, which is detrimental to the borrower in the case. Do you see that a lot too? I've seen that constantly throughout my career.
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky.
Yeah.
Because it can help on the personal side. But again, you have to know what your story is. And if you're saying, hey, like, this is my available cash flow, this is my repayment ability, and then there's a loan on the balance sheet that affects that number, then you're going to recalculate, and that's going to change the scenario.
Yep,
So you
exactly.
need to know what you need, and make the scenario fit what you need.
Got it. Well, at this point, and any conversation about any specific companies you want to mention or websites people could go to or any other information while you're doing that, I'm going to invite the audience to add any questions. I got a bunch of questions that are starting that I'll be talking and answering a few of them. So gives the audience some time to put some questions in they have. But any companies that you want to talk about or compare or give us a feel for these microfunding CDFIs and give us some more details on them.
Yeah. So there's several in LA, and they're really, really solid companies. There's one it used to be called Opportunity Fund. It merged with Accion. Now it's called Accion Opportunity Fund. They're a micro CDFI, so that's their specialty. There's one out of San Diego, but that has offices in LA, called CDC Small Business. There are, let's see. There's one that we have, and the name escapes me, but I know the program is called Semilla, SEMIA, which is Spanish for seed. So, this is another program where, again, you can, it's a CDFI, and their role is to look at you and your idea and your expectations and not the numbers. And you can always reach out. Like, there's several that I'm just not coming up with right now. But I'm always happy to make introductions there.
And in speaking of reaching out, you can either send an email to Lauren, or Lauren, I don't know, you might have been speaking to Annie about the best way to get in touch with Sebastian, but that's going to go in the chat as well on how to get in touch with Sebastian and reach out to our team with more questions on that. And Opportunity Fund, when they were called Opportunity Fund, I worked with them myself with a client on behalf of a client and found that they were pretty easy to work with. Also, Sebastian, and I don't know if this is typical in this this field, because like I said, it's not one I'm familiar with, but I know they were even allowing collateral if you had a car. So they seem just more willing to have these unique situations that I never saw before. I was quite surprised to see that, to be honest, because that's never been my experiences. So it does open up to other opportunities, doesn't it?
It does. Things have changed after the pandemic. They used to be a lot more flexible when it comes to that. It's not so much the case anymore. But again, they're trying to look at you holistically, and they're trying to get anything that they can that's going to be, helpful to get you funded as part of the pitch.
Got it. We got a good question. We got a couple in the audience, but some that I think are real prevalent. And this is a good one. Should you be a member of the bank you request the loan from? And this is a good thing for people to understand. So why don't you take that one away about having to be a member of the place you're borrowing from?
No. So, if it's a credit union, they'll ask you to open an account as part of the funding, but it's not like I wouldn't open an account unless I was getting a loan from them. And that's an interesting point, Lori. This is about relationships. It used to be that you could have a relationship with a bank and that would matter. And I include credit unions and CDFIs and everyone. It doesn't really. You can be their customer for 20 years. And if the pitch doesn't work, they're not going to give you money. If the numbers don't add up, they're not going to give you money. So a lot of people get pissed at the big banks because it's like, I've banked there for so many years and they didn't give me money. And it's like, they don't care,
No, they don't. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because you're right. People think, well, if they know me, and all of a so they get too hung up on if they like my idea, and it's whether the numbers pencil out. Is the revenue going to be able to pay back the loan, and is the loan going to be profitable to the institution? Because we got to remember, they're in the business as well. They're in the business of selling money. In fact, when I was a banker, I was like, well, I guess I'm in the business of selling money now, because I am selling as a banker. That was the one thing I got to say, Sebastian, that surprised me when I became a banker later, because I thought it was going to be this interesting thing. And I was like, oh my God, I'm just a salesperson. I just sell money. That's what I do.
And that's one of the really tricky things too, because, a lot of people will go to a bank for a loan, and you have to think about it now from the banker's perspective. You need to close X amount of loans in a month in order to meet your quotas or your whatever, right? So if you're going to take too much time for them to approve you, they're not going to want to spend time doing that. So they're going to decline you. And a lot of times we think, oh, it's me. They decline me because it's my number, but no, they may have declined you because they just don't have the time or the resources to develop that file to get it funded. And now we're stuck thinking I don't qualify and I can't get a loan. When if we had done our pitch properly, if our numbers had add up, then we can go and we will get the yes, because, if you can show a banker that that they're going to close you and that they're going to hit their quotas, then, they'll sit down and they'll do it.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Sebastian. That was one of the reasons why I had a very short time in banking, because for me personally, having been a consultant and used to sit down and solve problems, it took me a while to figure out I need to get to somebody, get close, get the numbers, look at the numbers. If they add up, great. If they don't, go on to the next, or I didn't make my quotas and I was in trouble. And so I think it's real important for people going after bank loans to realize that's what's happening on the other side. And that's why it happens the way it does. They love you. You don't add up, they're gone. They're on to the next.
Yeah.
We got another question from someone in the audience, and I might be saying the name wrong, so I'm going to spell it as well. Is VITA helpful resource for small businesses? VITA. I think I said it wrong. Do you know who VITA is? I don't.
No.
Gotcha. Just no, I thought maybe it was that I didn't know, so I thought I would just at least ask. Now, here's a really good question, and I think this lends itself to things we've been talking, and it's a great summary question. So this person is wanting to know, first of all, the first part, is it a way to set up a consultation? Yes, get through Lauren, will you get a consultation? That's a given. But I want to continue with the question because I love what they're asking. To get the process started for future growth, so I am prepared for a larger your loan in 2 years. I think that is a good sentence. So let's talk to that sentence. And please do get in touch with Lauren or myself to get a consultation, or Sebastian, because we want to work with you right now. And Sebastian's going to tell you why.
Right. Because to me, like this is honestly, when you help somebody get funding, it's a 3-year relationship. It's not a like, I need money now, let's fix it. Because I mean, I think I actually counted, I think it was like 95% of the people that I see, when they first sit down with me, they don't qualify because they don't show enough net profit to show that they qualify for a loan. So, you know, almost every single time we have to sit down and start the process, which means we need to get you money now. So we're just going to do whatever it takes to get you some and get it started. But our work really begins next year, when with this year's numbers, we can get you the funding that you need next year. And we can do it confidently, because, you know, if you have a $5,000 payment a month and a $75,000 net profit,
oh, I think Sebastian froze for a second. I think he'll be back. So I'm just going to continue the conversation. So as you look into the future, you're also looking at putting together forecasts, so you have a really good idea of where the company's going to be, and you can start tracking that forecast. You know, when I would work as a CFO, and I still do for many companies, we had what we called a capital strategy. And I would look at the situation and I would say, well, we're going to need X amount to be able to grow, to be able to do X, to be able to do Y. I would then look at my different funding options that are available to me. And I would even pull in some things like, can I lease some equipment rather than paying cash? Can I do a PO funding or an asset-based funding on inventory? And what I was doing is I was collectively looking at all of the different funding options that were available to me, and I was looking at the cost of capital. So if I did this option, it would be this interest rate, and this option would be this interest rate. And if I did this, it may be on the balance sheet, where a lease is not on the balance sheet. So if banks need to look at me, look at my balance sheet, this is not going to harm me. Now, I know right now I probably spoke in CFO talk that was over a lot in the audience's head. I get that. But what I'm trying to communicate to you is, going for funding, getting financing, it needs to be a full-on strategy. It needs to be something that you can think through, and you can come up with various funding sources. You know the resources you're going to need ahead of time. Now, sometimes what happens is we have situations that come up immediately and we have to get financing. That happens to us personally, it happens to us professionally. That's a given. But in the most part, what we want to do is we want to be able to plan. Sebastian and I was managed to talk about cost of capital, different funding options, and I kept the ball going. So no worries on that. It's called technology. I was laughing about it earlier when Lauren spoke technology. In the olden days, when I did all my public speaking, all I had to do is worry about get through the traffic and get on stage. Once I was on stage, I was on stage. I knew I wasn't going to get yanked off, right? But in our day today, I don't have to worry about traffic getting there. I got to worry about staying there. So I totally get it. But with that, we got about 5 minutes left. So I want to say, anything you'd like to add? Let's just kind of chat more about this micro funding. And there's a couple things that I thought maybe we could bring up, Sebastian, and that is perhaps touch on PO financing and asset-based, just to explain to the audience that working capital is maybe more hard to get than if you're doing inventory, and also you can do leasing. I mentioned that a minute ago. And then the other thing is maybe any things, and we didn't talk about this at all, Sebastian, that people should consider staying away from, you know, these hard money that is costing them quite a lot. So why don't we take away those two topics for a little bit of our time remaining?
Yeah, of course. So one of the really interesting things that has happened in the last few years, I think it was part of the Obama banking package, is that now you can borrow money but not call it not a loan. And that means that you can charge interest, which isn't interest, for exorbitant amounts. So merchant cash advances, alternative lending, PO financing, inventory, it's essentially future receivables financing. All this is it's designed to price risk with very limited available data, which means that it's going to be really expensive. And, because their focus is to make as much money as quickly as possible from you, is probably not going to help you out. I have to refinance people out of those all the time. I've seen people, go on those. So I would suggest that you stay away from, alternative financing to the greatest extent that you can. I think, if you want to go for a line of credit is always a great thing because, if you have a line of credit, you need to buy a container of stuff, you draw, buy, sell, pay, and repeat. You're good. If you can't do that, then a term loan is the second best option because, you borrow enough to pay, for 5 containers, and that gets you through the first year, and then, pay it off, ask for more, move on. I think the most alternative you want to get is if those two don't work, try a personal loan and then invest it in the business. Credit unions are great to do, a $10,000-$20,000 loan, and you can, deploy that in the business. That would work. I wouldn't do anything other than that. The only other thing I would consider is there's like Stripe and PayPal, these fintechs, they will lend you against your daily deposits. So if you have a coffee shop and say, you sell $1,000 a day, then, they'll essentially let you borrow some money and take it out of those deposits. Sometimes they can be okay, but you have to think about this because, if you make $1,000 a day and they're taking $100 a day, now, your cash flow is impacted, and that could hurt when comes time to, pay for your expenses or buy your inventory.
I'm glad you mentioned that because Nate mentioned that as well. And we talked about it when he was on the show. And the other thing is the amount you're paying in interest isn't upfront in those situations. And it's a shocking number usually.
Right. Yeah. It's, I've seen 150%. Like if you calculate the interest, it's 150%. And they'll do every trick in the book to not answer that question, but
yeah, they will. And that comes back with not planning in advance. That's when you're reacting quickly to a situation, and of course then you pay a higher amount. Now we have one last question we'll take time for, and this is someone who has a construction company, and what he's basically asking is that he's got framing and concrete and different vendors. He's talking about rendered services, and he's wanting to know if he can get a loan to pay his companies, his vendors, and that is a type of borrowing of money when you need to pay for vendors for a new project or something. So talk a little bit about borrowing money to pay for vendors, whoever the vendors may be, because there's a difference between paying past due vendors and paying new vendor projects, etc. So why don't you speak to that for a minute?
Oh, yeah, of course. Like if you have a vendor and you're buying something that you're going to sell, that's a slam dunk. You want to be doing that. And if you have a situation where you may have past due bills, you never want to borrow to that. If you borrow to pay new vendors, get new product, generate new, then with that new revenue that you're generating, you can think about starting to pay the past due stuff. But if you borrow money to pay something and it's not going to generate money, you're creating a problem for yourself. It's not going to help you down the line, because down the line you're not going to be making more revenue, and now you have an extra payment to make.
Yep. In accounting, we call it unearned revenue too, when you're using your deposits that you got to pay for things, and it ends up in a really bad circular loop. Well, I can't believe, Sebastian, we are out of time. So first of all, I want to thank you so much for coming on and having this important discussion. I think it kind of brings us full circle with our understanding of funding, which is always a question. So we're going to be asking you to come back on and talk more. This has been really great. What I love about our conversation today, Sebastian, is many of the tips that you gave, like drawing the line between revenue and how you're going to pay the loan, you've said it in such elegant, simple ways that our audience can really grasp it, and it can give them an underlining foundation understanding of the process and what they need to consider. And I think that's an important conversation that's not had enough. So I thank you so much. I know Lauren's put your information or PCC's information to get in touch with you. So Lauren, welcome back to our show here, Lauren. Thank you so much. Was that not another great conversation to be had? We're really learning a lot through these shows, aren't we?
100%. And then starting it off with archaeology and our history, and then we jumped into numbers. I mean, come on. It was awesome.
I forgot, Lauren, I couldn't help this. I had to go. So you're digging for pottery and then went for digging for gold. I could not miss doing that.
Man, I didn't even think of that. Thank you.
No, I thought about it at the beginning and I left it go, and I was like, I have got to slam dunk that. So Sebastian, our guest who dug for pottery and now will help you dig for gold. I should have started with this, right?
Thank you.
With that, I want to say thank you to everybody in our audience. Thank you to our frequent flyers, those new to the show. Tune in next week. We got another great show. I got a great lineup in March. Don't forget to reach out to me if you want to make an appointment with me. I think I've connected with everybody. Always good to go over numbers and talk to the people in the audience. And Lauren, thank you so much for always being here, putting all that information in the chat. I saw that you collected Sebastian's words and put them in the chat. There was a lot happening today, so I didn't see all messages and everything, but I saw there was a lot of events, and I think we had almost 60 people at one point on the show. So another great audience. So with that, I want to thank everybody for coming on Small Biz Talk with your host, Lori Williams, and I will see you next week. Lauren's going to stay behind, get all the information and answer any additional questions. Thanks again, Sebastian. Hope to have you back on the show again soon. Bye, everybody.
Bye, Lori. Bye, Sebastian. Thank you.
Bye.
All right, everyone, go ahead and check that chat. I put in Sebastian's information, and then also I dropped in my email address if you'd like to get in contact with Lori. Thank you for joining us again. Wasn't it awesome? I mean, archaeology and then money. So we look forward to seeing you next week, actually, for another episode of Small Biz Talk, Solutions for Your Small Business. Thanks so much for joining us. Bye.